The French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars may have opened the door to nationalism, but in the early 19th century, it was difficult for nationalists to walk through. Dynastic powers held the upper hand and prevented the rise of popular sovereignty. At the Congress of Vienna, the victorious powers sought to restore dynastic control. And so in Italy, the victorious powers reversed Napoleonic gains and replaced Napoleonic governments with dynastic states. European royal families regained control of the Italian peninsula. So, for example, the Habsburgs got the biggest portion of northern Italy. They retook control of the kingdom of Lombardia and Venetia, the eastern Po River Valley. Once again, this area is predominantly ethnically Italian. It's on the southern side of the Alps. It's not German, but the Congress of Vienna restored this people, this Italian people, this Lombardian people, back to a Germanic prince. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany around Florence, the famous home of the Medici, it also went back to a Habsburg prince. The Duchy of Modena, Reggio, Miralando, all of these territories, right, in the middle, right between Tuscany and Lombardia, these little small areas, went under a Habsburg duke. The Congress of Vienna was not concerned about popular sovereignty or having a prince that represented the people. The state belonged to the family. It was part of their house. The Pope regained control of central Italy. So papal control stretched from Rome up to Ravenna. This territory had been ruled by the Pope since the Middle Ages, and it was considered part of the papal states. He had personal control as a monarch. He was not simply the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, a religion. He was a monarch in his own right, and his capital was Rome. The Savoyards, right, the House of Savoy, took control of northwestern Italy. It included the Kingdom of Sardinia, the island, as well as the territory of Piedmont. So eventually, this gets called the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia. Sardinia was the original seat of a kingdom, but the kings of Piedmont-Sardinia found it much more advantageous to rule from Turin. Turin was a richer city. It was becoming an industrial city, and it provided the foundation for the House of Savoy to build up its own strength. But the House of Savoy itself was a French family. It was from the other side of the Alps, just south of Lake Geneva. Savoy today is a part of France. The Duke of Savoy became King of Sardinia. He also gained another room in his house, Piedmont. So he becomes the King of Piedmont-Sardinia. His house is Savoy. But it's a French family. They're not Italian. It's not an Italian family, right? There was no effort to align royal dynastic families with the ethnicity of the people. That was not necessary. That was not part of the way of thinking. This is not popular sovereignty. These were dynastic states. in the south of the Italian peninsula. The Bourbons regained control, first of the Kingdom of Sicily, right, the little island at the edge of the boot. And so the Bourbon dynasty, hopefully you know those from Louis XIV, going all the way back to Henry Bourbon, right? What would be considered ethnically French family, became kings of Sicily, and then they also gained control of the Kingdom of Naples on the mainland, the bottom part of the boot. Eventually, this becomes known as the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. But once again, you have a French family in control or sitting on an Italian throne, right? Those words are modern words, the way to describe it, as this is a Frenchman sitting on an Italian throne. No, this is a royal family who owns a house. It's their own personal property. There just happens to be Sicilians and Italians living in their house, but they have no say in the government, right? This is the whole purpose of restoration, dynastic restoration. So Italy, in the first half of the 19th century, was a composition of dynastic states. The wars of unification, though, move Italy from many states to one state. And in that process of moving from many states to one state is the process of nationalism. Not since the Roman Empire, right? Not since 500 AD. The last person to actually unify the Italian peninsula was the Roman Emperor Justinian. When he failed, when it failed, Italian unification was over. It is this movement of nationalism, trying to bring together the people of Lombardia, Piedmont, Sardinia, Tuscany, Sicily, bringing all of these diverse people under one ruler, right, is the process of creating a national identity. At first, it starts from the bottom up. This was the revolution of 1848. It happened across Europe, right? There was a revolution in Paris. There was a revolution in Berlin. That revolutionary spirit, right, bubbled up from popular resentment against dynastic rulers. And for a brief period of time, it looked like they were winning. In this case, it was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini helped lead a popular rebellion, thinking he was about on the verge of creating a republic. He styled his movement as the Young Italy movement, right, as opposed to those old farts who are trying to control the country. His was young and vibrant and new and fresh. Unfortunately for him, as with many cases in the early 19th century, foreign powers intervened. The French intervened, the Austrians intervened. Neither one of them wanted to see the Habsburgs or the Bourbons toppled by a popular rebellion. Mazzini was pushed to the side, and dynastic states reemerged rather quickly. The main beneficiary of that instability was the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia under the reign of Victor Emmanuel II. He was king of Piedmont-Sardinia from 1849 to 1861. And then, as we're going to see, from 1861 to 1878, he actually becomes king of Italy. He had for himself a constitutional monarchy. He had to deal with a parliament. He had to deal with property owners voting for representation. And so that gave him experience with questions of popular input, or at least property right input. And he saw the value of nationalism. Nationalism could help strengthen his own position. In particular, he listened to the ideas of Count Camillo de Cavour. De Cavour was a banker. He had experience running the Bank of Turin. He understood finance, he understood commerce, he understood economic policy. He was well-read, well-educated. He was not born into a position of privilege. He wrote a journal, the Il Risorgimento, the resurgence. He too wanted a resurgence of Italy, not just Piedmont-Sardinia. As a member of parliament, he worked his way into be the Minister of Commerce, eventually the Minister of Finance, and then when Italy's created, the Prime Minister of Italy. He used his private sector experience to try to improve the economic condition of the kingdom, the financial position of the kingdom, all of making that the strength of the kingdom. And he was able to tap into nationalism. He understood the power of nationalism. Unlike other monarchs, he wasn't scared of nationalism. He realized that if he could tie popular sentiment to his king, make his king a national hero, that it would stabilize Victor Emmanuel's seat rather than destabilize. So as commerce minister and eventually finance minister, he instituted a series of reforms that strengthened Piedmont-Sardinia from the top down. One of those had to do with agriculture. So he promoted the use of science in agriculture, understanding how scientific processes can improve agricultural productivity. He secured property rights for small landowners, making sure that commoners could own land and sell land and not have to worry about nobles seizing or stealing their land, confiscating. He also privatized church lands. The church across Europe had been one of the largest landowners, owning vineyards, owning cropland. And so Cavour privatizes that land, forces the church to sell it to private individuals, opening up opportunities for businessmen to own land. Now, the church wasn't happy with this, but it did create a loyalty among small farmers to the kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia. It also created a loyalty amongst liberals who did not want to see the church playing an active role in economics or politics. So these reforms helped strengthen the hand of Victor Emmanuel. Cavour also saw the ability of railroads to support industrial production, moving resources to where they belong, helping factories with the supply chain of resources and then distribution. Cavour built harbors to connect northern Italy to the rest of the world. He built canals so that goods could be transported over water inland without the need of a railroad, right? But in the early 19th century, wasn't quite sure whether railroads or canals would win out altogether. Well, eventually railroads beat out canals, but they don't know this right now. All of this made northern Italy much richer than the rest of the country. And if northern Italy, Piedmont, becomes much richer than the rest of the country, that increases the tax base of Victor Emmanuel II. Victor Emmanuel II then can spend more money on those new arms, right? Those new types of rifles that are coming out. And so even though you have a relatively small house, the House of Savoy, he is embracing the revolutionary changes in the early 19th century. He is embracing industrialization, and he's beginning to work towards embracing nationalization. So nationalism and industrialism come together to strengthen the House of Savoy. And the House of Savoy then uses that to move from many Italies to one Italy. For the House of Savoy to thrive, it needed to overcome the obstacles placed before it by the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, and the Pope. The House of Savoy was just one of multiple dynasties sharing the Italian peninsula. Cavour developed a strategy to push the others off the peninsula. His first target was Lombardy and Venetia, right? Piedmont shared the Po River Valley with Lombardy and Venetia. The Po River starts in the Alps and flows out to the Adriatic Sea. Lombardy and Venetia were two of the richest regions on the Italian peninsula. The Habsburgs had control. Cavour plotted with the French Emperor, Napoleon III, to drive the Habsburgs out of Lombardia and Venetia. Cavour negotiated a defense pact at Plumbier with Napoleon III. Cavour secured support for Italian unification from Napoleon III. Napoleon agreed that Italy could be unified under the House of Piedmont-Sardinia. In exchange, Napoleon gained two territories from Savoy. First was Savoy itself, right? This was the ancestral territory of the King of Savoy. It was on the French side of the Alps. It was predominantly French-speaking people. Since the time of Louis XIV, he considered the Alps as part of the natural frontiers of the Kingdom of France. And so Napoleon demanded and got control over this territory. He also got control over the county of Nice. Now, Nice was also right on the border with the Alps, but it was a predominantly Italian-speaking people. Right? It was more Italian than it was French. But once again, in order to secure further gains on the Italian peninsula against the Habsburgs, against the Bourbons, against the Pope, Cavour agreed that he would eventually give these up. Because they both knew there was a time when Piedmont-Sardinia expanded that it was going to face the Habsburgs. And so both Napoleon's forces and Cavour's forces began to prepare for a potential war. The Habsburgs demanded, through an ultimatum, the disarmament of Piedmont-Sardinia. Lay down your arms, stop. And this produced a casus belli, a cause for war. Because Cavour stood firm. He understood that he had the backing of Napoleon III. And so every time the Habsburgs tried to bully him, he stood up to it. And then eventually the Habsburgs attacked, right? This attack triggered that defense pact, putting Napoleon in a position where he had to then stand up for what he agreed. The conflict didn't last long. The Habsburgs sued for peace at the Peace of Villafranca in 1859. It is that Peace of Villafranca that starts the process of Italian unification, because the Habsburgs had to give up Tuscany. They had to give up Parma. This put Piedmont-Sardinia on the path to expanding its house. In southern Italy, Cavour faced the kingdom of the two Sicilies. In this case, he had the assistance of Garibaldi. Garibaldi was a nationalist. He saw the vibrancy, resurgence of the kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia, and so he raised a volunteer army of red shirts, people power. And they landed in Sicily, they landed in Naples, and they moved their way up from the south up, eventually capturing Rome. And so, at the end of the day, Garibaldi surrendered his victories to Victor Emmanuel II. This allowed Victor Emmanuel II to create the Kingdom of Italy in 1861. So with the help of his own reform effort of industrialization inside Piedmont, right, around Turin, created the financial stability and the economic power to build an army to go up against the Habsburgs with a very clever set of diplomatic negotiations with Napoleon III, and with the popular support of people like Garibaldi, right? Nationalism. This small dynasty, the House of Savoy, was able to leverage some of the most revolutionary movements of the early 19th century, industrialization and nationalism. These two forces, in the hands of Victor Emmanuel II, Cavour, transformed Italy from a compilation of dynastic states into a single nation state in 1861, the Kingdom of Italy.